So raise your hand if you feel overwhelmed. Okay, welcome to the club. And the ones that probably should be here don't think they had time to come talk about it. This is a huge common occurrence. Obviously, I get overwhelmed all the time, even in preparing this, ironically. So let me give you a couple caveats. Feel free to take pictures of any slides. I'm not going to send them out afterwards, but can I get one or two readers when we have quotes? That's nice and loud. Okay, one there and one here. Okay, great. So the irony of this lecture is we're going to talk about overwhelm, but the actual presentation may feel overwhelming because we're going to touch so many things. So know that going in that we're not going to go super deep on any one of these solutions, but if you can take away 1, 2, or 3 ideas that you can implement, then all the better. I will have a recap slide at the end that will kind of list all the ideas to go in, but kind of relax. Ask the spirit to teach you on what's one thing you can improve on that will lower your overwhelm and your ability to perform. So I want to start telling you a story on my mission. This was one of the most impactful times of my life as I ran into a homeless guy in Eureka, California. And he had a 40-ounce thing of beer in a brown paper bag. And I was just getting to know him. And he said he used to be a professor at UCLA. He had a family, a wife and kids, and he just couldn't take it anymore. And he said he preferred not having the responsibility and being homeless on the street. So that's obviously an extreme example of what overwhelm can do to you. Hopefully none of you are going to go in that direction. But, you know, we all feel it on a day-to-day basis in different ways. Let me throw out the question, what does overwhelm feel like for you? Can you describe what it feels like to you? Anyone? Please? Loss of control. What else? Yeah.
Oh, avoidance.
Avoidance. Okay, you feel like avoiding? Please. Say?
Loneliness, like not being able to see clear.
Oh, great. Please.
Like a spiral.
That's a great analogy. Spiraling out of control.
Orienting.
Okay. Anybody feel claustrophobic or like tightness in their chest? That's kind of how I feel it. Like the world's kind of crashing down. Part of this is kind of removing the shame. I mean, obviously with the number of people in this class, this is not just you. And it's not like you're doing something wrong. This is really an aspect of the human existence and especially the modern existence. So let me start with this framework. So the brain is about 2% of your weight, but it's responsible for 20% of your body's energy. So this is really where overwhelm is going to come from.
Yeah, so I think the first thing to answer your question, the first thing we have to understand is that the brain's most important job is not thinking, it's not feeling, it's not seeing, it's regulating the systems of your body. So you have a lot going on inside your body. So do I. So do all our listeners right now. There's a whole drama going on inside there. Lots and lots and lots of systems. They all have to be coordinated in a metabolically efficient way for you to stay healthy. And there's this constant transaction that's going on always throughout your entire life. Your brain sends predictions, sends, neural commands to the body. And the body sends sense data back to the brain constantly. That dialogue is going on all the time. And
so she calls this the body budget. Can I get somebody to read this nice and loud?
Yes. Just like companies have a financial officer to make sure their budget is balanced, your brain manages the budget for all the accounts in your body. It keeps track of water, salt, glucose, and that keeps a person alive and well. Learning and moving the body uses the most energy for your brain. So prediction and habit are easier than being surprised or making decisions.
Okay, so this explains the phenomenon of why you feel overwhelmed. And your mood is a really good barometer of where your body budget is at. It's like looking at your bank balance. Is your mood is a reflection of how your body is responding to all the pressures in your life. And you guys are going what some scientists call sprints right now. 4 years as an undergrad or a grad student, this is like more than you can ask for. My wife just started graduate school and she's totally overwhelmed. And I find that she's eating more treats to try to like rebuild, give her energy for the brain, which is really interesting. So a related metaphor, if you think of kind of the body budget as related to like you start to get a low bank balance or start even getting a negative bank balance. Another way to look at it is with a cup or a glass. So I want to share a personal story. I've shared it before, so I apologize the repetitiveness, but about 18 years ago, we had our second child. It was 2 a.m. and my wife got up to go feed our baby, and that woke me up. And half of my body, the entire left side of my body went numb. And I went to the doctor the next day because I thought, oh, maybe I had a heart attack or something. And she's ran all the tests. She's like, you had a panic attack. I didn't know what it was. It precipitated more panic attacks, but she proceeded to explain like your body just hit its max. So I'd stopped eating sugar. I changed one of my medications. I was applying to business school. I was really trying to get into Harvard Business School. I just had my second kid. I was working full time. I just had too much going on with my body and my brain that my body just gave out. And you can kind of look at it as everybody's got a different body budget or a different cup. You've got genetics, epigenetics. Somebody's taking 18 credits. Somebody's taking 8 credits. Some of you guys think in a healthier way than others. You might have some negative baggage from where you're bringing. You might have difficulty in your relationships. I mean, all these kind of things that you kind of have to manage. And some people are built better for overwhelm and some of us are not. And so we kind of have to figure out what works for us, but be careful of it spilling over. So you need to find ways of kind of letting some of this out. And if you look at the brain structured like this, when we go into overwhelm, the rational part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, pretty much shuts down and you go limbic, which is the lower brain. You start thinking like you're 9, 8, 7 years old again. You're reverting to old habits, old coping mechanisms. You're in survival mode. And that's why you can't think straight. That's why you can't plan well. That's why you're doing things that aren't necessarily admirable. And you're looking for a way out. So if you feel stress and anxiety, you're going to look for some type of avoidance. And that's going to be Netflix, video games, pornography, social media, hopefully not substances. You might be using caffeine or something to relax, or etc. So that provides short-term relief, but it actually makes the stress increase over time because this is taking you from addressing what you really need to talk about and deal with.
Dopamine dictates the quality of your life. If you keep dopamine levels in your brain above a certain level, what you could call your feel-good baseline, life is full of joy and you're driven to learn, grow, and get things done. But if your dopamine level drops below the feel-good baseline, you feel anxious and find it hard to focus. And if you stay below the dopamine baseline, you'll lack the motivation to do anything. Studies show that mice who have their dopamine levels depleted are not motivated enough to eat food directly in front of them and eventually starve to death. One way to raise your dopamine level is to seek pleasure by checking your phone for interesting messages, eating your favorite comfort food, or enjoying a sugary beverage. But the dopamine spike you get from pleasure is quickly followed by a dopamine crash, that keeps you below your feel-good baseline for an extended period of time. In other words, when you pursue pleasure, you get pain. Picture a pain-pleasure seesaw in your mind. When you jump on the pleasure side, your brain hires gremlins to jump on the pain side to balance out the seesaw. Since we live in an age of abundance and have easy access to pleasure, we build up the gremlins on the pain side. This dynamic explains why people in rich countries with access to constant pleasure have the highest rates of suicide, depression, and physical pain. If you want to get your gremlins off the pain side and regain a baseline level of motivation, there are only two long-term solutions: pursue pain or abstain. Anna Lemke says, pressing on the pain side of the balance can lead to its opposite, pleasure. Unlike pressing on the pleasure side, the dopamine that comes from pain is indirect and potentially more enduring.
So we'll probably have a lecture that goes more into that. It's incredibly fascinating and insightful. So let me talk about what are some of the things that we could do to, well, actually, let's read this slide first. Sorry, will you read this one, please? My reader? My reader? My reader?
Oh, you're talking to me. Sorry. Have you ever noticed that you're never overwhelmed by positive scenarios, but always by negative ones? When you overthink, it's because your mind is running endless negative scenarios. You don't wake up thinking, I'm too healthy today. My relationship is going too well. I'm making too much money. We fall into negative patterns because our brains are wired to focus on threats. Part of overwhelm is constantly trying to avoid difficult emotions.
So we talked a couple weeks ago about avoiding difficult emotions, and the answer to that is to lean into them so they don't get worse. So let's talk about deposits in the body budget to give us a better balance so we don't dip into a negative balance. So I'm going to give some examples, and these are kind of like the primary answers, and there's going to be no insight in what I talk about, but maybe we got to find some reason to get us better and to actually do them. So I'm going to talk about things you're all familiar with. One is physical exercise. So these are all three of my kids. I raised them to play soccer. They play soccer for about 14 years, so they kind of know the importance of balance. They all lift weights now. And there was a meta study that looked at 100 different peer-reviewed research studies, which showed physical activity is 1.5 times more effective at reducing mild to moderate depression, stress, and anxiety than medication or therapy. And so I asked them, I texted them last week, I said, tell me what weightlifting or exercise has done for your mental health. And here's some of their comments. These are all three kids. They're pretty consistent about it. And it's incredibly, I've seen one child who was incredibly suicidal for quite a long time, kind of work through that and work out of it because it was their way of channeling very difficult emotions. And it trains your stress response to be able to handle many more hits to it. So sleep is another one. I know college is a really tough time to get good sleep. But this is one of the excerpts. I'm sorry, I didn't write down his name, but if you get 10 nights of 6 hours of sleep, that's equivalent to going 24 hours with no sleep. And I have a feeling you guys are operating in that category and kind of even in a prideful way. Oh man, I got 2 hours of sleep last night. I didn't go to bed till 4, as though that's some kind of badge of honor. So let me talk about food. And this is one that I've been fighting against my entire life. I'm 50 and I'm just starting to clue into like really the impact that food has. Your metabolism starts slowing at 30. So you can't get away with what you're getting away with now when you hit 30. It starts to slow down and it's so much harder to lose weight and get the energy that you had when you were young. So I want to show you on the left, this is my glucose. for a day. So you can see how high the spikes are. Ideally, it doesn't go above 140. So that's an indication of some kind of quick carbs. So I decided to get a continual glucose monitor. I'm not diabetic, but I wanted to monitor this because I was feeling mood effects, energy effects, performance effects, because I was responding so poorly to carbohydrates. So I started to change the order in which I ate food. I started to eliminate carbs and eat more protein and fats and vegetables, fruits and vegetables. So you can see the difference about 3 months apart. I'm barely even cracking 100, and my average glucose is going from about 111 to 85. So then last night I splurged, and you can see what happens. That's a bowl of Lucky Charms. So what is so powerful about this is, well, let me tell you what I did. Let me go to that slide. So one of the simplest things you can do is change the order in which you eat food. So carbohydrates by themselves, like this kind of sugar candied cereal in the morning, or like a muffin on an empty stomach, is about the worst thing you can do. A glass of orange juice, it's just going to spike your blood sugar. So if you start with vegetables and then go into protein and fat next, that will slow down any carbs that you eat last. It will keep it lower, it'll keep the spike lower, and it'll keep the drop. And I've noticed, watch this in your own life. If you have carbs during the day, say you have a soda at lunch or something that's really processed and sweet, see what your proclivities are later in the day of what you want to eat. I can almost guarantee if I have a Dr. Pepper or a Mountain Dew over lunch, I'm going to eat like crap in the afternoon and evening. Whereas if I do high protein, either in the morning and or lunch, I typically don't eat breakfast, but if I skip the carbs and I still want to eat carbs, if I save the carbs till later and then do the proper food order, I'm eating much less carbs. I've lost 30 pounds this year just by following. That's my humble brag, you know. Because I thought I can't teach these principles unless I do them myself. So, but something to think about. And I know it's really hard in college. So, do you guys have like ideas of ways you eat healthier? Anybody want to share some of their ideas really quickly? Meal prep? In what way?
Tupperware, just like I just like making chicken and rice.
Okay. So some of the ideas, you can make all meals like, you can make all your meals on Sunday. So like these mason jar salads, you can make those all on Sunday. They keep in the fridge and then you take one a day. Or you make your own Lunchables, kind of packed, which is going to be a lot less processed than buying Lunchables. Put them in Tupperware like you mentioned. It's tough because you're limited on time and you're limited on money. It's also like, it's hard to do produce in college. And Chloe, one of my student employees, said it's really good to partner up with a roommate or two to share produce because it tends to go bad and it can be really expensive. So there's lots of different ways, but I recognize that it's a constant challenge to kind of do this well. But it's really good to pre-make meals. So this is some of the best advice I ever learned from my sister-in-law, who said, sometimes you've got to slow down to speed up. I was kind of living under this impression, like I have to maximize my time. I've got to get as much in. There's no way. And I was like, maybe I could actually slow down to actually accomplish more. The time to relax is sometimes when you don't have time for it, to unwind. And believe it or not, this whole Overwhelm talk is totally applicable to faculty and staff. Students are not unique. Faculty are like up here with what they're asked to do. Homework assignments, responsibilities in their department, it's incredibly demanding. And I see both sides of the student and faculty. So it's really great to schedule your distractions. So instead of getting sucked up, which kind of like we've talked about in previous lectures about getting sucked up into social media and stuff, is to actually plan the diversions. So this is called the Pomodoro technique, where you're setting a specific time where you're going to work for a specific time. Usually it's like 20 to 30 minutes. And then you actually plan to relax, whether that's TV, whether that's social media. That's a much better way to approach things. You're really only wasting time if it's not intentional. So build in that social media time or build in that streaming time or whatever you do to kind of escape and decompress, but plan it. Then you can really focus and dig deep on the deep work part. Relationships really calms the nervous system. It's called co-regulation of nervous system. You can do it on your own, but it's much better in a group. So sometimes you can combine some of these good habits. So what if you scheduled going to the gym with friends? So now you're kind of killing two birds with one stone, or you're studying together, or you're eating with other folks. Relationships were even important for Jesus. So this is one cool way to remember is the self-care method. So think about these in terms of return on investment. So you might think, I don't have time to go to the gym. That's like 45 minutes or an hour or whatever. I don't have time to read my scriptures or go to the temple or spend time with friends. I've got to pound this out. But think of some of these things as having a multiplier effect or think in investment terms. Like some investments have like a 10x power, a 5x power. You're going to get more back. If you go exercise for 30 or 60 minutes, that's going to affect the rest of your day. And that's going to be like giving you more hours in the day. And there's some things that might only take a half hour. Let's say you doom scroll on Instagram or TikTok for a half hour. That's not just a half hour loss. That's also killing your brain cells. And I don't say that with derision because I love Instagram Reels. But I've tried to curate it so it's actually beneficial. This is where I get a lot of my videos is, all right, well, okay, I'll be vulnerable. Sitting in the bathroom, scrolling Instagram. Find some of my best stuff, but be careful about the return on investment and think, sleep is worth the time. So I understand sometimes you got to give it up, but think about that. So sometimes we've got just too much on our plate. And that obviously leads to, I'm not just, this is a metaphorical slide. Sometimes you just got too much going on. We had a student in the College of Mathematical Sciences. He quadruple majored. Physics, math, statistics, and computer science. So he took 21 credits every semester, graduated in 4 years. I don't know this for a fact. What do you think he gave up? Everything else. So amazing, and he had a 4.0 as well. So I have a feeling he didn't go on one date the entire time he was at UIU. So that's just an example. I'm not even sure he ate, but sometimes we just have to take things off our plate. What might be something that you simplify? What are ways that you could simplify your life right now? real quick, raise your hand if you've got some ideas, please.
I find that sometimes I struggle to set aside free time for myself, but if there's something else that I feel like I have an obligation to go to, then I can convince myself. So I stay late at institute to help put things away, and that way it helps me have more time with friends, more time away.
Oh, I love that. Okay. What are things you can actually take away to take something off your plate or adjust? Maybe this is why you're in class, you don't have any ideas, please.
Idea of perfection.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that. So maybe backing off that. So you've heard the phrase C's get degrees. Maybe that is a better approach. Like, unless you're going to graduate school, my sister was the valedictorian of the nursing school, and she was so upset that no employer asked her what her GPA was. She was like, all that work for nothing. I understand going to graduate school is kind of a different thing, but sometimes maybe you just got to back it off. Maybe you need to take less credits. Maybe we need to turn off the recorder for this, but maybe you need to transfer to UVU. If you know me well, it's all good humor. It's great. I'm not. Maybe you need to switch majors. Maybe you need to skip a semester. Maybe you need to. I mean, if you end up destroying yourself in this whole process, like you're burning the candle at both ends. So Warren Buffett, the most famous investor, the difference between successful people and really successful people is that they're really successful people say no to almost everything. So this is kind of what you're getting at with the idea of boundaries. So when I started teaching this class 2 years ago, one of the professors sent me this email. I love it. I'd love to see your presentation, but I'm not available tomorrow, and it's likely I won't catch another time either. He was very upfront about what his boundaries were, and he's incredibly accomplished. So let's talk about clutter. How does that picture make your mind feel? Kind of gross, right? So UCLA studied 32 families over 4 years, and they looked at how much stuff they had in their house. And there was a direct correlation between stress and the amount of stuff they had accumulated in the house. And this mostly affected, well, disproportionately affected women, which is really interesting. Like just always looking at stuff. So which one of these is a better place to study in? To pray? I mean, just, you can imagine the feelings, the difference in feelings from this. So if it's out of sight, it's out of mind. So you're kind of opening up space in your body budget when you clean it up like that. So this is about what my browsers used to look like. I was like, oh yeah, I'm going to get to that later. I'm going to get to that later. Anybody have a hi, my name's Spencer and I'm a tabaholic. So that takes away kind of this mental energy that's really not doing any good. Anybody believe in a zero inbox? Anybody have? I love a zero inbox. Can I get an amen? So the guy I replaced for my position, my administrative position, had worked there for 10 years and he had never deleted an email. And it was all in his inbox. If I have like 5 emails, I'm going crazy. I got to get it down to 1, or I'm only putting the ones I'm working on in the inbox. So I want to give you a mnemonic to think about. Ohio. That means only hold it once. So when you have a dish and then you put it in the sink, how often does that dish, I mean, how long does that dish stay in there? And then you got to go in and then put it in to the dishwasher. Why don't you just put it straight into the dishwasher? Or you come home, you take your clothes off, you put them on the floor. Then after a while, your apartment's all cluttered, your sink's full, you get mad at your roommates for not doing their dishes. Just hold it once. Hang up that shirt, put the shoes away, and you're kind of preventing future overwhelm. So let's talk about mental clutter. This is actually kind of a more serious.
Babashev, right? As an experiment, he gathered a bunch of people, put them in one room, and then he made them remember a number. Then they had to walk down the hall, enter another room, and recite that number. Some people were given a 7-digit number, while other people were given a 2-digit number. Now here's the cool part, right? When they were walking down that hallway, unbeknownst to them, somebody would interrupt them. They didn't know that this was part of the experiment, but what happened was a woman would come up to them with a bunch of snacks. And she had 2 snacks on option. She'd say, do you want some chocolate cake or do you want some fruit? Pretty simple decision. However, what happened was that the people who only had to remember the 2-digit number were twice as likely to pick the fruit. Whereas the people who had to remember all of those 7 digits, they tended to go for the chocolate cake. What does this mean? To explain his findings, Babashev referenced this theory that the brain is divided into 2 systems. You have the rational, or the prefrontal cortex, and the emotional, the limbic system. Their rational brain was busy. It was trying to remember the 7-digit numbers. And so while it was in use, it didn't have enough resources to allocate to whether or not it should pick the healthier decision. Without the rational brain to remind you to take the healthy option, the emotional one just said, chocolate frickin' cake. Let's go. And as it turns out, this emotional response is incredibly common in people who are overwhelmed and stressed.
So there's something called the Zeigarnik effect. This is where you're more likely to remember unfinished tasks than finished tasks. So if you have a lot of to-dos kind of floating around in your mind, that's just taking up mental RAM, which is meant for short-term memory, and you're just taking up things that you could be much more effective at. So I want you to pull out that piece of paper that you should have picked up called the brain dump. We're going to spend the next 3 to 5 minutes. I want you to list everything that you have to do in your life right now. Let's just spend a couple minutes getting that on paper.
The action items.
Yes. Okay. I know you want like 2 more hours to do that. I would encourage you to do this on a weekly basis, and we're going to talk about how to go about it. So now look at that list. Have you ever noticed that some things just never move off your to-do list?
Yeah.
So one of the main reasons that happens is because it's really a project. So if anything that you put down on there has more than one action item involved, you get overwhelmed, and then you end up looking at that list and skipping it because you're like, that's going to take too much time. So later when you come back to this, so I want you to circle those projects which need to be put on like a different list, and these need to be broken down into all the action items. So just go ahead and circle them. And then when you're going through this, if you're really trying to get every to-do item out of your brain and on paper, which you should do, you can list all your stewardships at the top to remind you, I'm a minister, I'm the Relief Society teacher, I'm a sister, I'm a student, I've got all these classes. You list all your classes, and then you list your relationship with God, or all the different stewardships you have, and that will trigger more to-dos that you've got to do. So then ideally, then the next step is to go through that list and then just list the 3 top priorities of what you need to do right now. So when I talk about making larger things into smaller, I'm talking about email so-and-so, make a phone call to the dealer to fix my car, or look up the phone number. Make them very small so they're really discreet and accomplishable, instead of big things like write a book chapter, or even like do the 10-page report for physics 1, whatever they are, 111. That might be start a Google search on thermodynamics or something. Like whatever the most basic, smallest action item you can think of, that needs to be on the list. Then you boil it down to your 3 top priorities, and then you figure out what you should focus on. So this is my actual to-do list from a couple months ago. So I typically only want to have 3 to-dos, because if I accomplish 3 things in a day, I'm a happy man. So I'll put those there, and then I have a place to put everything else in my next action items. So I still have a record of them, but they're out of sight, out of mind. So they're not going to overwhelm me mentally. And then I actually put the one thing I'm going to focus on in my menu bar. That's going a little OCD, but like having 3 to-dos is a great place to start. And then whenever you, yeah, quick question.
Just to ask, what about those of us who literally just having that list and looking at it overwhelmed?
Do you have a better way? It's worse to keep it in your mind. So either you get rid of the list. This is one, if you can think of a better way, talk to me afterwards, but you got to get it out of your brain is what I'm saying, because it's just floating in there and you're trying to remember it. And so what I do, I do the official brain dump list once a week. And then anytime I have an idea, a thought, an action item, a project, I get it out of my head. So if I've got my phone, I will write it down. If I'm driving, I have a little button on my steering wheel that's attached to my phone, and I will say, hey Siri, remind me to blah, 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 and it will go into my brain dump list. So I can do it right now. I can say, hey Siri. Yeah. So you can get it out of your brain as soon as possible, and then you can really devote your mental energy on what you need to focus on. So this is my trigger, and I have a feeling it's 99% of your trigger for overwhelm, is thinking of everything you've got to do all at once. So we got to get out of that. We got to focus on one thing at a time. Anybody think they're a good multitasker? So there's been a lot of research that you guys have benefited from to know that this actually isn't possible. It still exists, but 10, 20 years ago, this was one of the main job description items. Companies were always looking for people who were good at multitasking. It's called it's called project switching or attention switching. it's exhausting and it saps your energy. So every time you add another project, it's decreasing your productivity and your ability to actually do anything well. And it takes, so an average American spends 2.1 to 2.5 hours being distracted every day. And it takes 25 minutes for an employee to regain full focus after being interrupted. So my main job on campus, I have my door open and people walk in all day long. And I always end the day with, I don't even know what I got done because I was interrupted so many times. This is why most faculty close their door. So I would encourage you to take away all the pings, dings, and rings in your life. Be careful about checking your email consistently. Maybe set aside 1 or 2 times during the day where you check your email. Because what you're trying to get to is the ability to do deep work, where you're able to sit your behind in a chair for an extended period of time. And if you can't do 30 minutes, do 25. If you can't do that, do 10. Do whatever you can do, and then learn and discipline yourself to sit there longer so you can do deep work. And then schedule in the downtime. So this is called time blocking, where you're setting aside on your calendar specific things. That way you don't get sucked out by distractions. So let me jump ahead.
How much stuff is in your head?
So this is essentially what we live with now. There's, there used to be, you couldn't find information. There weren't libraries. They stored books and Bibles in monasteries that were incredibly difficult to go to. 5 to 10% were literate. I think this is kind of like a tool of the devil, like hiding the truth because it's not available. And now,
How much stuff?
Now he's switched. Now I'm going to throw so much information out there that the truth is going to be hard to sift through and find and distill. So now we live in a world where we have to kind of rely on gatekeepers or curators, and teachers serve that function. I think this class is a filter. I'm boiling down hundreds of hours of research for you to get in 50 minutes. And hopefully you trust me enough to go, okay, well, he's 90 to 95% accurate on this one topic. That's worth my time. You have to figure out how to avoid being sucked in by all this information. I think the brethren serve this function well as kind of refocusing us on what's really important. This is a map of how quickly information is doubling. So now IBM predicted 4 years ago that knowledge was doubling every 12 hours. With AI, this is exponentially increasing. So another one we talked about a couple weeks ago was the paradox of choice. We have so many options, and this takes so much mental power to go through that so Burden's donkey or Burden's ass metaphor talks about he had 2 choices to make that were too similar that he sat in the middle because he couldn't make the right decision and he ended up starving to death. So that's the metaphor, but we kind of have our equivalent. If you go on Amazon to shop for a product and you're buying a box of toothpicks, one's 50 cents, one's $1. How much time are you going to spend reading all the reviews, comparing it when it doesn't really matter? I think there's a lot of mental energy spent in this. This is a good example of it. Dog with its 2 owners. So in 1950, when my parents were at BYU, like men were engineers and women were secretaries or nurses. Now you have like 130 majors, and then I don't know how many career options you have after that. But somehow we have to reduce our choices, otherwise we go through decision fatigue. So Steve Jobs and Mark Zuckerberg are famous for wearing the same outfit every day because that eliminated a choice so they could expend their mental energy and their body budget on other things. So I really think the church and its standards sometimes is looked at as a bad thing. Like, don't tell me what to do, but in actuality, it lowers stress. Because if you've already made your moral decisions, for example, ahead of time, you're like, okay, this boy's in my apartment. Now I decide, how far am I going to go with this guy? Are we going to go in my bedroom? Am I going to kiss him? Are we going to do something else? Like, if you have to evaluate at every moral decision, am I going to drink this? Am I going to use this substance? I think religion is actually a really anxiety lowering function. And I don't know that we talk about that too much. Daily routine puts things in our lower brain, so we don't even have to think about it. So if you can get good habits, then that really lowers all the decisions that you have to make during the day. Overwhelm is really how you run your brain. So things like regret. So this is a good way to think about it. Where are you living? Obviously, we have to reflect on the past and learn from mistakes and learn on experiences. We have to look in the future and think about what we're going to plan. But anxiety is largely based in the future. It's all in the future. So if you can learn how to live in the present, and that's gratitude and focusing on what you're doing now, that one thing, instead of thinking about all the stuff you've got to do and thinking about graduation only. I mean, you are in the funnest time of your life, ideally. And how often do you spend thinking, I cannot believe I get this chance to take this test in the testing center in the world's best university? Some people like Disney and think that's the happiest place on earth. I really think BYU is the happiest place on earth. I would really encourage you to enjoy the journey. My wife took me to Northern California, which is where I serve my mission. This is where the redwoods are. Normally, she gets stressed out to the max because she's like a wife, typical mother wife. Where are we going to stay? What's our daily plan? What are we going to do? When are we going to eat? How much is it going to cost? And she finally decided, I'm going to change my mindset. I'm just going to enjoy the journey. I'm going to let Spencer plan this whole thing. And she was an entirely different person. I was like, who are you? And she had the happiest time of her life because she wasn't so focused on the future. She was living in the present. So this is another one, is focusing on things that are out of your control. And I think the biggest thing with this is feeling like we can control other people and how they think about us and how we want them to act. And because there's a sense of we can influence the relationship, we think that it's in our control, but it's really not, because they've got agency. So kind of get that out of your mind. You don't need to stress who's going to win the election. That's pretty much out of your control. You can do your vote, and maybe you can influence your friends, but you're not going to control who wins. Let me skip to the end. Even Thomas Jefferson procrastinated. So this kind of leads back to perfectionism. Having incredibly unreasonable standards for yourself will lead to procrastination, which leads to stress. So lower the friction.
Sure.
Just get started. Let me skip to the end. This is my quote. It's better to do something poorly than not do it at all. It's better to be a poor minister than never visit your ministry. And I'll close with this. It's really helpful to talk to somebody when you get overwhelmed. Just realizing that there's another 250 people that are struggling with the same thing you are. When you talk to them, you can kind of take what are jumbled thoughts that are ruminating and bouncing around and make it in a more linear fashion. So let me ask for help before it's not too late. So here's your take-home tips, which summarizes all those. I would encourage you to take a picture. Great to see you guys. Hopefully we'll see you next week.
Loving it?
Okay.
You're writing on a bunch of like cool.
There's that. Schedule and you like stress.
It's like it kind of makes you realize like, wow, I'm learning.
Same day and time, everyone change locations, like.
Garrett.
Yeah, no worries.
It's at 12, but. How are you guys? Take care.